Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a highly anticipated webinar on everyone's favorite topic, which is the Pilot Rebate Model program. So I just want to I want to welcome you and share how excited I am to share some of this content with you. Unfortunately, not everything is great news as we're dealing with this, but I just want to thank you. I was joking with my colleague here, Bailey, and was telling her when she took over for me I think last two webinars. So we were joking and competing here um, about who has the most viewers. So we're back. We're doing it together. It's her and I. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Anthony Velasquez. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at PharmaForce. We are a pharmacy solutions provider in the 340B space, in the pharmacy benefit management space, and provide technology solutions for covered entities and employers in those areas. And every month we do a webinar. And these webinars are intended to be educational. They're intended just to help you as we are trying to figure out together how to navigate the world of 340B and the changes that are coming very, very fast at all of us. So that is our goal. We want to spend the next 30 to 45 minutes of sharing with you sort of the newest and the latest of what's going on in the 340B program as it relates to these rebate models that are changing very, very fast. And we just want to share that information with you. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will take questions at the end. I have team members and moderators that are going to be answering some of those questions for you. Before I continue, I want to allow my colleague Bailey to introduce herself to all of you, for those of you that might not know her. So Bailey, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Bailey Voelker. I am the Director of Client Services here at PharmaForce. So I oversee all of the account management team, our referrals application, and then also Claims Connect, which ties into rebate model and ESP data submissions. And I already see we got one question that I do want to answer, Anthony. Jared asked who had the most viewers. I would just like to say that I did break that record, but I think we broke another record this week. So
I'll let you take that for now. I'll let you take that for now. We'll see. All right, so let's get right into it. Let me do a quick disclosure. The information in this presentation, especially in this topic, including any analysis or opinion, represents only the personal views of the presenter. These perspectives do not necessarily align with the official stance of PharmaForce or its affiliates. This content is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, financial, or professional advice. Okay, so everything that we're going to share, please double check on your own, check with your legal team, do your own research. We have done research and just trying to explain this in the best way possible that we know how to do it. We're going to touch on 5 different subjects today. So we're going to talk about the latest on the 340B pilot model and the plans that were approved. There were originally 8 plans that were approved, and then there was a 9th that came right after that. So there's officially 9 plans approved for all the drugs. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to give you the Beacon updates, which is the IT vendor that's going to manage all of this. So we, as a third-party administrator company, get to work with and join calls with Beacon, who we are working on interfacing with, and get updates and get insights that other vendors do. And we just like to share some of the things that we learned on that, because that's always very insightful. We're going to talk about operational challenges. A lot of the questions that we have been getting from our clients, that we have been seeing posted, are around how to operationalize some of these things. So basically the 340B is encapsulated in how do you turn policy into practice. And this is yet another example of that. And I'm also going to share with you about just navigating uncertainty. Just how do you navigate this world of not knowing what it's all going to look like. It looks like someone has their hand raised. If you can keep that until the end, please, or put your question in the Q&A, that would be really, really helpful. Unless you guys can't hear me or something can't be seen, yes, we will be sending the slides in the recording. So yes, you will get that. All right, so let's go ahead right into this rebate model. Okay, so this is the feeling, this is what we've been getting, and hearing from covered entities all over the sphere of 340B. So the question is, does the rebate model rollout feel a little chaotic? Is the question here. So before we get started, just to lighten the mood, this is how I'm sure many of you feel as a covered entity right now. Um, Trying to deal with this, trying to navigate, trying to interpret, trying to get, your questions answered. There's more questions than there's answers. I'm sure that there's some entities that feel frustrated about, getting answers from HRSA, from Beacon, from TPAs, from everyone. There's only just a couple of weeks to implement this new process. And what's worse is during the holidays, because that doesn't help either. Because just like everyone wants to take off for Thanksgiving and for Christmas. And those are major, major holidays. And all of this is sort of all in sort of the time frame of the year where where things slow down in general. There's uncertainties of how are things going to work. There's a lot of questions of like, and to some of them, some of those questions, there's the answer is we will see in 2026 when we see the data flowing from Beacon and some other things that that are out of our control. And then these are asking how much savings will my entity lose? So those are all questions that are all fair. One of the interesting headlines that I saw is that there is changes to the rebate FAQs. If you go on the Beacon portal, for example, some of the FAQs are still outdated today. So you might be reading things on that FAQ, and then you're going to hear me speak, and then you're going to say, no, that's not what the FAQ says. But based on the conversation that we've had with them, and now the confirmation on the approved plans, some of those things are not fully updated. Okay, so I know that doesn't help, but we're going to try to answer a lot of your questions and give you hopefully some confidence of going into this new year, into this new plan, into this new workflow with some confidence that and understand how to best handle it. Bailey, anything else you will add to that? I know you're getting peppered with all the questions. So anything you would add to that?
No, I'm kind of just reading the comments or the chat though, and someone said a little chaotic. It seems understated, and I
Yeah.
would agree with all of those things. So yes.
Uh, Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So here's the latest. All right. So I try to map out like a little timeline just so that we all know where we are. All right. So I'm not going to bore you with all the history, but we are in November of 2025, where we have the updated FAQs on the HRSA website. We have updated guidance to the approved plans. And now we're looking forward to the pilot program go live, which will be for the 8 plans. The ninth plan, which was Novartis, has a go live date of April 1st, 2026. And the expectation is that you will still have 340B pricing until that day, until the implementation of that ninth plan. Okay. So these nine plans cover all of the drugs that are part of this rebate pilot model. They were approved, as you all remember, and I think it was 2 webinars ago. One of the things that we were saying was, well, the government shut down. We don't know if this is actually going to happen. We don't know if anyone at HRSA or the Office of Pharmacy Affairs is even working. We were like, hey, maybe this gets delayed a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And out of all the comments, actually, one of the very, very frequent comment that was submitted to HRSA was, we need more time. We need more time to implement this, to understand this, to know how it's going to work. And unfortunately, that did not happen. And when I would say many, many people did not expect for these plans to be approved when it did, but it did. The plans were approved in the way that HRSA had stated, which were very short. I think the pilot language actually said 1,000 words or less. So they were approved. We confirmed basically, you know, they're all going to process through Beacon, and these apply to all covered entity types. Okay, so those were that is the sort of the headline of the latest that has happened with these rebate pilots. Okay. So now what actually was approved? So let's get into a little bit more of what's clear. All right. So if you all remember, I'm sure Bailey talked about this, I talked about this before. There were some buckets of very big areas of concern, and that is, would entities have to submit purchasing and invoicing data? In other words, did you have to submit claims data and invoicing data and everything that came along with what that meant, right? In other words, initially what we heard was that the manufacturers were submitting plans, and even Beacon as IT vendor had shared that they were asking for invoicing data. And we were trying to figure out, well, what does that really mean? Does that mean that you have to hit a packet size? If you don't hit a packet size and you don't have invoicing data to submit for, let's say, a third of a bottle, what does that mean to the rebate? Do you get a rebate? Did you not get a rebate? Right. So there were a lot of questions around that, and I think there's more clarity now. I wouldn't say it's fully answered, but there's a lot more clarity that it seems that HRSA denied the manufacturers and for Beacon to collect invoicing data. So any of the approved plans that you read, the that was not an approved addition to the data specs from what was in the original pilot data spec that HRSA put out. So we confirm also that Beacon is a single submission vendor. So every manufacturer chose Beacon. Everything's being processed through Beacon right now for 340B rebates. The data submission requirements, also one of the things that was outstanding from the first sort of like since the beginning of the FAQ, the pilot publishing that came out, was okay, so this does include medical claims, and what are the final data specs for that? And we didn't know that, and now we know that. Now we have that. That's listed, that's published. That has been shared with us, the TPAs, directly from Beacon, as this is how we're expecting it. These are the fields that we expect. This is how we expect them. This is where you need to, this is what you need to know when submitting that data. Okay. And then the plans clarified also the handling of unreplenished claims. This is still a topic of a lot of conversation of what happens to unreplenished claims that have a data service of 2025. And though what was agreed to in those plans, I don't think is in the most favorable way, for the benefit of covered entities, and I think it's going to create some challenges. But we'll talk about that. I have a couple slides on just that topic. Bailey, anything else that you would add to that based on everything that has come out so far, just in relationship to what we know with the approved plans right now?
Yeah, I do want to add that while purchasing data is not required, we did confirm that there have been other statements made that if the rebates that you're requesting exceed your WAC purchases for that drug or NDC on your retail account post 1/1/26, that they will be denied. So they're not looking at purchasing data from a claim submission perspective, but they're looking at your purchasing data from your actual retail accounts.
Yeah, and that would be on the 340B account, right, Bailey? Because they're putting the pricing, the WAC pricing on the 340B account, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, so great point. And I think honestly, I think a lot of that is still yet to be seen, because we do the rebate denials seem to be focused around the submission period of the 45 days. Is the claim older than the 45 days? There's going to be a check for deduplication to make sure that, for example, that to make sure that it's not a duplicate rebate request. And also a check against MTF rebates as well is going to happen by Beacon. Um, so we have those specs of what some of those fallout reasons or error reasons are going to be. There's a couple of things that is, I would say, still confusing. So again, there are questions around the invoice data. I'll give you an example. For example, a few of the approved plans, I think a handful of them, said they're going to give you a grace period and allow the 340B pricing to sort of, remain in effect for a little bit longer. Some of them said, depending on the case, on a case by case basis, you can request for additional claims that were dispensed in 2025 to be to be processed, and to be paid as a rebate. So there are those things where like that's going to be dependent on an entity case by case basis of whether that entity will be able to, to submit claims from 2025. So we'll have to see how some of that plays out. The Beacon FAQ language, I know I'm hearing from entities that that's very frustrating. That's frustrating that they can go in and that's not fully updated and that's not fully up to date, and it seems like it's changing. There was an article written by our friends at 340B Report around referral scripts, and it seemed like referral scripts were going to be denied or were going to be rejected as part of this review, and they came back and kind of clarified that and said no, it's not really that's not really going to happen. So there's some things about this process that are a little bit, there's still questions about it. I think there's timeline extensions that entities were hoping would at least in everything that was submitted in the comments, that at least a extension to the implementation of this would be approved by HRSA, and that did not happen, unfortunately. So here we are. Bailey, before I go to the third and last, anything else you will add to that?
I don't think so. I think you covered that.
All right. So then lastly, I think what has come out to be sort of the main topic of concern is primarily the question around unreplenished claims and what happens to those. I know entities are planning already ahead and looking at their accumulations across their 340B program in order to have a plan for replenishing any claims that have not either hit a package size or things like that by the end of the year. So there's a lot of questions on how exactly that's going to happen. Some of the plans say basically you could submit claims up to one full package. Well, that's not much if you're a large covered entity. Entities are going to have each a plan on how to order up their 340B accumulations for 340B savings that they are essentially entitled to or able to capture. If you haven't seen this, if you go on the HRSA website, it's all there, but this is a breakdown of manufacturer with a drug, with the contact email, and a link. This is a link to each manufacturer plan that's in the Beacon portal. The Novartis one, I have not seen that updated. I checked last night and that was not there. So even though it was approved and it's on the HRSA FAQ website as the Novartis plan was approved for April 1st, 2026, I have not seen that posted on the Beacon website just yet. And I don't expect any surprises in there, but that will be interesting to see what comes out of that. All right. All right, so let's move on to the Beacon updates because I think there's some really good stuff here. On my right here of this presentation, I have the final data specs. These data specs, thankfully, are the same across the board. So these data specs they're not different by manufacturer. They're the same across the board, which is a great thing. And I guess in one positive thing of using one platform is there's one data spec, right? The more platforms that you have, the different data becomes harder to manage. So a quick overview of just all the basics were confirmed. The plans that were approved, claims must be submitted within 45 days. Payments will be issued within 10 days of approval. They clarified that it will happen within 10 calendar days, not business days. The rebates will be paid at a claim level. In light of not receiving invoicing data, that the rebates will be paid at a claim level, even if that claim that you're submitting a rebate for hasn't reached a full package size. Okay, so that is our understanding. Net claims are preferred, but there's no limits on reversals. So if you are submitting manually, you have to keep track of reversals. You have to pull that. So if you submit, a claim that's adjudicated on January the 2nd, that claim is reversed on January the 10th. You have to submit that reversal. If it's reversed on the 15th, you have to submit that reversal to Beacon through your file submission process. So that's going to be something that you have to maintain. The medical claims have some really interesting and unique things. Nothing really scary. So basically all the fields that you see here for the under the medical claims tab. The rendering physician ID is one that I highlighted in here because I don't know how many entities send that to their TPA, just because as you are in drug utilization data specs, that might not always be a field that is sent. I think we have that in our data spec and we get that in our data spec. I don't know how often that happens. So that's one that I saw concerning. Um, there are other things about the medical claims data specs and specifically that sounds to me like it's going to be difficult for you to manually submit because they want a claim line number. They want a unique ID field as well for you to submit for that charge. So if the way you get that data, those fields are not available, you're gonna have to maintain that as a covered entity. So there could be some challenges in that. The invoice information collection. So as I shared before, HRSA did not approve collecting this. And the language that we got is that there's an expectation that a covered entity must purchase the drug. Either the drug precedes the data service, so the drug is purchased before the data service on the claim, or the drug is purchased 7 days after the data service. All right, it's what the language was that was shared with us. And then the 340B ceiling price. So two updates on this. There will be, if you didn't hear this already, there will be a 340B price file that you can download from the Beacon portal. So once you register, you have access, you go in there, there'll be a 340B price file you can download. We heard from Beacon that we may get that 340B ceiling price data through the interface. That interface is not finalized. So that again, let me say that one more time, just so you guys know it is, and I'm not throwing anyone on the bus here, but it is November the 19th, and there are parts of that interface that are not finalized just yet in the reconciliation reporting and some other areas. So just so you guys know of, we are ready, prepared, ready to implement, but some of those things are pending with, finalization on the Beacon side. All right. Bailey, anything, did I miss anything related to this that you think it's important to share?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head
All right.
at the end there though, where you said, we don't, there are still things that were pending and we just don't know what we don't know yet.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. You are right. I was actually reading an FAQ this morning, preparing for this, and I was like, well, that's outdated. That's not correct. All right. So let's talk about operational challenges, because this is one of those things that I know. I know that you as a covered entity that's listening to this, I know what you're thinking. In your head, you're thinking about, well, what claims are gonna get blocked in 2026? How much financial impact is that gonna be? How will this affect my cash card program? I have to rush and replenish these unreplenished, claims with the data service of 2025. What am I gonna do in December in that last week, for those claims and all of that? So I know that you as a covered entity, your head is spinning and you're trying to make sense of it all. And our goal here is just to be helpful and to say, hey, look, these are the five biggest operational challenges that we see from our perspective. And this differs by covered entity, differs by covered entity type. In general, these are the ones that we see that are very challenging. Number one is wrapping your hands around the unreplenished claims reconciliation. So doing an impact of the lost savings, for example, the challenges that might come with ordering this. So, for example, if you have in-house pharmacies, you have contract pharmacies, you have specialty pharmacies, you have multiple TPAs, you might even have a pharmacy that is that's not using a TPA, for example, or you're doing things manually. All of those things, you might have pharmacies. We know of covered entity that use pharmacies who the pharmacy is their own TPA and they have their own way of tracking things. So these are all the different sources of information that you have to gather to see which claims, as part of these 10 drugs, have I not ordered under a 340B account. And to have a plan to do that. Now that's easier said than done because there's a lot of things that you have to take into account. You have to talk to your contract pharmacy partner. or partners to see if if there's an inventory, for example, that hasn't been ordered, if they can receive that inventory. You have to plan to do that internally too. If you're an in-house pharmacy, for example, and you just accumulated 340B accumulations that you haven't ordered down just yet, for whatever reason, and ordering that, it's going to mean that you're going to get a large order, and you have to figure out a way to store that. That might be a challenge that you have to navigate as a covered entity in your health system. So there's work that's going to go into doing that, but that is an important task to do, because if you don't do that by the end of December, then there might not be any way for you to recoup any of those 340B eligible claims. If you have a referral program, your referral program is a little bit delayed in capturing the claims. So maybe those claims that are, captured in November, you're not going to see them until early December or mid-December. You have to be thinking about that as well. So there's an entire breadth of scope of things that are impacted by sort of, just saying order down your accumulators, before the end of the year, right? It's not that simple. A lot of you will know better than us that that can be very, very challenging to actually operationalize. All right, number two on this topic, and the second challenging is the policies across your contract pharmacy network specifically. I think if it's your own pharmacies, you have control over this, but we're already hearing there's going to be global blocking, not for the plan, not for the plan, but for the NDCs, and that these drugs are going to be blocked at some of the biggest TPAs and chain pharmacies in the market, which that means that that's going to impact you. It's going to impact you as a covered entity. You have to be prepared for that. You have to, know what that impact is going to be and analyze that impact. That's work, and that's, and coming up with that and calculating that is and reporting that to your finance team potentially, and preparing for budgets and things like that as it relates to this is tough work, and and if it comes from different sources, it's even a bigger challenge. There are some pharmacies who are saying we're not going to block at the drug level, but we're going to block at the plan level. In other words, we're going to block any of the claims that are for those plans, that are for those drugs, but only Part D plans, only if the insurance payer on that product is Part D. So there's some of that going on, and that's not even considering what an independent pharmacy is going to do, because they're trying to figure out as well, how this is all going to work when requesting a rebate and all of that. So there's challenges from all different areas as it relates to that piece of this entire puzzle. Bailey, anything else you will add to that before I go to the next one?
No, just watching the chat again, I saw a couple people mention a few larger chains, and everything that I've seen mentioned there lines up exactly with what we've seen. So I would say that those are what's in the chat is
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. I don't want to call out any names. I don't want to call out any names. I think, they're trying to figure things out. I think what I've heard is we're just gonna block these until we figure it out.
Yeah.
Is the message. I think the chain pharmacies are impacted by this financially as well, and understand that there's going to be an impact to patients being served through 40B medications and things like that. But that is the message that we're hearing, and that's just, we just want to pass that on to those of you that are joining this. All right, claim submission. This is the big one, right? This is you as a covered entity who are managing a 340B program. So if you're on this webinar and you are a 340B program manager, a 340B coordinator, analyst, a consultant helping a hospital, this is the main thing, right? So I remember I had an old boss who used to tell me major in the majors and minor in the minors. And that was her way of telling me just focus on the things that are really critical. This is a major. If you don't submit claims, you're not going to get a rebate. So as everything else is challenging, I think that entities have to be focused on having a plan around submitting data to Beacon and uploading that data into the Beacon portal, especially if you have multiple TPAs, and especially if you need staffing, if you need resources, if you need help doing that. that this is something that entities will need to do. I have been hearing from certain covered entities that are saying they don't see the big impact on the medical claim side as big as they thought as it relates to submitting transactions for the medical claim, so that they're not going to focus on that. But the claims dispensed at contract pharmacies, retail settings are the ones where there will be an opportunity, a large opportunity of savings recoupment through the rebate. So yeah, that's another operational challenge just because there's going to be work involved in getting that all set up and getting vendors. Technology assistance. This is also something that's coming out. There is a lot of misinformation around this right now. There is a lot of companies that are popping up that are it's not even, sometimes some entities are confused of whether, what are you saying you can handle for me? You're saying you can handle my beacon rebates or my pharmacy MTF rebates for the Part D drugs? Like, what is it exactly that you can handle? And if you're saying you can handle it all, how are you going to get my claims for my TPA? And how is that all going to work? And we're hearing vendors just saying, "Oh yeah, we're fully interfaced and we'll just get everything for you." And I just want to educate with you to be careful with some of these things. I think there's some well-meaning vendors out there who are trying to be helpful, um, and trying to say, hey, we got technology, we can submit for you, we can collect data. But it's not that simple. It's not that simple. This data lives in the third-party administrator platforms. And if your third-party administrator is not integrated with those third-party vendor solutions, then the process might not be as seamless as it's painted to be. So just wanna educate on that, on the added cost I might be by that. I don't know. I don't even know the name of what vendors are doing this, but be careful of hearing percentage-based fees and some other things related to submitting claims to Beacon. I think entities should just be careful with that with some of those things. Just because they're out there. And again, I think many of those vendors that are offering solutions are well-meaning and trying to be helpful. So no way I'm trying to call anyone out, but just saying that this is what we're hearing our customers coming to us with, saying, "Hey, what's going on here? Is this true that this is the only vendor that can do this, and that you guys might not be able to do this?" And things like that that are not truthful. So just watch out for that. And then the payment reconciliation is one where, hey, this is new, this is complex, and we don't know until we see it exactly how it's going to work. We have in theory how this data is going to flow and how it's going to come, but we don't have that completely ongoing at the moment, and that has not been fully provided, and that data is not fully there. So we don't know exactly how it's going to go. I think covered entities are going to be waiting to see how this process is implemented. Okay. And then going back to what I was saying of these top five challenges, that number one challenge is this unreplenished claims. And I want to keep saying this, and I want to keep pointing back at this. You have this as a cheat sheet. You can pull this from all of the approved plans. If you go to the Beacon Channel Management website, download those plans. This is a condensed version of the section in each approved plan that has this, where you can go in and see every single thing that every manufacturer is going to do. For example, if you look at Bristol Myers Squibb there, number 5, it says covered entities should replenish all 340B qualified claims before the rebate model's implementation. A 30-day grace period from January 1, 2026 allows one package per NDC 11 of Eliquis for unreplenished accumulations. BMS will assist with reconciliation during that startup. So, I mean, that's not going to be that's not a lot. So that grace period, I wouldn't count on that too much. And essentially, at this point, consensus is to order down your accumulators as a covered entity. So understand these, know these, analyze the impact of these, have an ordering plan, work with your pharmacies and partners and your TPAs and other chain pharmacies and gateways, for example, in order to come up with a ordering plan for these. If these can be processed through a credit-based replenishment, for example, you want to look into that. If some of these need to be ordered, you want to look into that. But they have to be obviously only for eligible 340B transactions. Okay, I know there's going to be a lot of questions on this. I can already know that there's going to be a lot of questions on this, but this is what we see as one of the biggest challenges. Um, Bailey, I'll stop here and see if you have any thoughts before I go, before we sort of, land the plane here at the end.
Yeah, I know that's top of mind. The ordering, making sure we are replenishing everything prior to January 1 is top of mind for most covered entities. Pretty much everyone that I talk to, that's their first priority. So I think um, first and foremost, just take a look at the impact, work with your TPA to take a look at that impact and see what you've got that needs to be replenished, and then come up with a game plan ahead of January 1 because as Anthony stated, they're not they might give you one NDC, one package of one NDC. They're not being especially gracious with that. So just make sure that you're making a plan to replenish as much as possible.
Yep. All right. And by the way, I just saw a comment on the percentage-based fees. I'm not judging that. I'm just saying just to make sure that you understand all your options. If you choose to go with a vendor that's charging that's on you as a covered entity. And then you can do whatever you guys want. But so I just saw a comment on that. I'm not judging that, and I think there's some value in that. But I was just saying just to make sure that you are understanding the full scope of the offerings that are out there. Okay, cool. So let's go to navigating uncertainty. So where are we? What January 2026 means for covered entities, right? So this is, you know, there's a lot of questions as we have been getting, but this is what we know for certain, um, is that you need to submit the claims through Beacon, the medical claims will be required. The approved plans has clarified the unreplenished claims handling. So as we just summarize here, I think in this what entities need to know part, I think what I would say on this is, hey, make sure that you register with Beacon. I'm hearing some entities that their legal team and having them review some language in their disclosure, there's security reviews involved. There's things that might take time. So if you haven't done that step to register with Beacon, go through the registration process, you want to do that. You don't want to wait on that. You want to have a game plan for implementing this. I know that there's some of you that are switching TPAs, and that makes it challenging, and you need to come up with a plan for that. You need to have assess your operational impact. I'm pretty sure if you're a 340B manager or coordinator and the finance department hasn't sent you an email to say what's the impact of this, or your CFO, I will be shocked. I know that there are customers that are doing worst case scenarios. So I talked to Cover the other day and said, hey, our worst case scenario is X, but we're preparing for 50% of that, right? And or we're preparing for 25% of that. So coming up with those operational impact analysis of what this will look like is something very, very, very important. How PharmaForce can help. So for covered entities that are our clients and you're on this call, we're going to be having a VIP webinar recording just for you, and then a Q&A just for you. We have had a team meeting with a lot of our clients because we are going to automate submission capabilities for both pharmacy claims and medical claims, and have already a platform that will submit claims on behalf of covered entities that choose to do that with us. You don't have to do that with us. That's totally optional, but we will have that capability. And we actually have a little video how easy it is to configure that per application, per covered entity. You can name the report and then you pick your report type, and we've already embedded it and coded it in the data specs that it would need for claims to be sent to Beacon. So all of it is if you're a PharmaForce client, we're going to be reaching out. You reach out to us. I know there's a lot of concerns around this. I know a lot of you I've talked to already, or Aaron on our team has talked to. If you're not a PharmaForce client, and you definitely should be talking to your TPA and making sure is your TPA planning on doing something like this. Bailey, any final comments before we go to the? Oh, somebody worked down that Q&A. It just went down a lot. Um,
No, I think we've got some really great questions in here, though.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So why don't we go to that? So before we go to that, I this is gonna it's gonna be interesting that this 340B conference is gonna be in February. Like I think that's gonna be like a few weeks after entities are implementing this. So that's gonna be interesting. But if you can make it, we're going to be there at that 340B conference. Our sales team is going to be at that Pathways to Progress conference, the NAC Policy Conference, which is in Washington, D.C., February 9th to the 12th. We'll be there as well. If you want to follow us or get in touch with us, our information is right here. All right. So, man, I truly hope that that was helpful. I hope that you learned something new. I know there's people posting all sorts of stuff. We have a guide that we have out as well. You can go on our website and download that on everything about the rebate model. Um, but I know there's a lot of questions that I hope that this was helpful. I hope that what we shared was helpful, in that. So, all right, let me go and take some questions. So. All right. An anonymous attendee asks, Beacon seems like it already offers insight into rebates and reconciliation. What is the added benefit of another vendor? Yeah, that's a really good question. And they do. Our understanding is that they're going to have reconciliation reporting and all of that. But you will have to go in manually and run your claims, your pharmacy claims, your medical claims. If you do that daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, that's your decision on how you handle that. But because of the cash flow constraint, in other words, if you start getting invoicing for drugs that you bought at WAC before you get the rebate, your covered entity might have a cash flow crunch. And because the WAC pricing is now put on your 340B account, what we see that today, some of our smaller entities, they hit credit limits. So we might see entities hitting credit limits a lot faster. And I don't even know, Bailey, I don't know if you've heard anything on that, but that's like something that I haven't really seen anyone talk on, is like if our entities are hitting credit limit today, where a product is at 340B pricing and it's invoice, imagine when that product is now at WAC on a 340B account. So anonymous attendee, you don't need another vendor, but doing this on your own manually will be much more complicated than doing ESP manually, because submitting to ESP is about keeping the 340B discount. Submitting for rebates is about the quicker you submit for the rebate, the quicker you get the rebate, and you almost want the rebate to beat the timeline that you have to pay for the invoice to the wholesaler. And if that becomes out of order and the invoice comes faster than the rebate comes because you're delayed in submitting that, that can lead to serious cash flow problems for your covered entity. I hope that makes sense. And if you have a
Yeah.
follow-up question, please, ask it, because that's a really important thing. That's a different between those two processes.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned on the last webinar as well that there's probably some benefit in reaching out to your wholesaler ahead of time and just checking on those limits and making sure that you're prepared for those changes.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope that makes sense. I love to hear comments on that, thoughts on that, because I know that that's the easiest thing to compare it to, right? Like the easiest thing to say is, hey, we have Beacon, right? Um, we have ESP. ESP has been around. So isn't this just like ESP? Well, it's just like ESP in the sense that you're submitting claims every so often, but it's very different from manufacturer restrictions and ESP submission, because it has serious cash flow implications if you don't get a rebate, or you get invoices from your wholesaler way before you get the rebate from Beacon. And your covered entity could be really hurting if that doesn't happen in the right order. So I hope that made sense. Okay, another question from Brent Fielder said the definition behind the specs are not uniform. Brent, I'd love to hear an example of that, of what you meant by that. All right, anonymous attendee, is it 45 days after dispense date or fill date? That's a good question. I would say that they are going to look at the date of service. Some people call it some people call it, I've heard dispense date or fill date kind of be used interchangeably, but it would be if the prescription is adjudicated on January 1, 2026, you have 45 days from that day to submit that for a rebate. And if it's submitted on day 47, then that claim may get denied.
Yeah, it's the date that the claim is processed.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. So there was a question from Alexandria. So CEs must purchase for about 7 days at reserve. It says, what happens if the package does not meet for? Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So Beacon clarified that we TPAs were on a call November 5th, so just a couple weeks ago. Got clarification that you as a covered entity will get paid for a claim that you submit for a rebate, even if that claim has not reached a full package size. That is the expectation. Let me say that one more time. If the claim is 340B eligible and passes all of the rules for eligibility that you have set in your policies and procedures, you can submit that claim to Beacon as long as you're registered, you have the pharmacy registered, right? All of that is in place for a rebate, and you will be paid a rebate. Okay, that is how we understand that's going to be operationalized. Okay. Anonymous attendee says, what are CEs doing since rendering physician ID is defined as administering physician, or physicians are not doing the administrations? That's a really good question. I don't know that there's any between us here, although this is live to hundreds of people that are on this. I don't know that that's anything other than just informational. I don't really know what that's going to do, or what that's going to be checked against. So I really don't know. I know that we collect that and I want to say in the data specs that we get, it's the physician that a physician that wrote the order.
Mhm.
So that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure on that. All right. Let me see. Question. Yep, there was a question on that. Is this rebate model only for Part D, or would it also include commercial plans? Okay. Really good question. Really good question. All right. So I'm going to try to explain this because this can be difficult to understand. The Inflation Reduction Act made it so that Medicare can negotiate pricing with manufacturers for these 10 drugs when they are dispensed or adjudicated for a Medicare Part D patient and the Medicare and a patient on the medical side. Okay. And when that happens, the patient, the pharmacy, if you have no 340B involved, the pharmacy will need to request a rebate for that transaction if you have no 340B involved. If you do have 340B involved, then a 340B rebate is eligible to be requested. When that happens, the drug is completely removed from your 340B catalog, and you have to request a rebate for all claims, not just the Part D claims. So what we're talking about now is that the NDC is no longer offered at the 340B pricing, and whether that NDC is dispensed to a Medicare Part D patient, a cash card patient, or a commercial patient, the entity has to submit for a rebate in all three of those cases. All right, I hope that was clear, but this affects every payer involved in your 340B program for one of these 10 drugs, which I think in total is like 194 NDCs or something like that. It's some big number close to the 200s of unique NDCs. 10 drugs, but unique NDCs. All right, so another question. Are you a TPA? Are you a TPA for MTF already? No, we are not. We are only doing the Beacon side. We are not doing the rebates for the Medicare Part D claims through the MTF. All right, should we tell our TPA to block these manufacturers now to prevent a true up? Good question. Should we tell our TPA to block these manufacturers now to prevent a true up? That's a tough question to answer without knowing more about your program, without knowing how your program is set up, without knowing, more about whether you are a full replenishment model or, yeah, it's a tough question to answer. My best answer to that is I will keep an eye on your accumulations to make sure that if you have very high number of accumulations and not enough um, purchases, that you figure out how to get that delta or that gap closed, is what I would say. And that was an anonymous attendee. Okay. Emily Owen says that we have a child site designation via ESP to keep pricing open at multiple CPs. Should we create a beacon account for each of our child sites or just one account for our parent site? Yikes, Emily. I have um man, can I phone a friend? I need to phone a friend at Apexis or something. Do I have that? Can I use a phone line and phone a friend at Apexis? Um Bailey, sorry, Emily, my understanding is that even if you have your ESP designations, that the rebate model will trump that. In other words, even if you have it designated properly, the rebate model will trump that and you will lose 340B pricing on your 340B catalogs,
Mhm.
even though your ESP designation and your manufacturer restrictions and all of that, it's all properly set up and everything.
That's my understanding as well. Don't come for me if we're wrong, but my understanding is that for Beacon, we're only looking at the parent ID, not the child site. You don't need to set up for each individual child site.
That's right. That's right. All right. Um, okay.
Oh, but I'm
So,
hearing, I'm seeing otherwise in the chat, so I may stand corrected here. You may actually need to register the child sites.
yeah, well, you might have to register the child sites if you have pharmacies at those child sites too, if you have pharmacies registered there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take a couple more questions. So this question is, how does a contract pharmacy fit into the rebate model? If a contract pharmacy is contracted to your 340B covered entity in the HRSA database and you're dispensing any of those drugs at that pharmacy, you're going to be impacted by this. Debbie says, looking to find out more about the 7-day purchase requirement. Debbie, why don't you can read the approved plans. I think there's some concerns around this because the FAQs on the Beacon website are not updated. So Debbie was asking, looking to find out more about the 7-day purchase requirement. Where can I find more language on this? This information came to us from Beacon, Debbie, in a presentation that we did with them. The FAQs don't seem to be fully updated on this. But I would direct you to them, or you can email the manufacturer contact as well. That's on the HRSA database as well. Because there were questions to Beacon about whether there was the ability to, if covenants don't submit purchasing data, how would they be able to confirm that a purchase happened for that claim? So there's going to be an accumulator balance that is going to be managed, from what we understand, but being able to track that at the claim level, I'm not sure that's really clear. All right, really good question. Who says will or who is going to hold manufacturers to that 10-day window rebate to be paid? Any financial penalties for them not paying? Yeah, that's a really good point. Unfortunately, the burden is put on you as a covered entity to report to HRSA if there are delays in payments. But in the FAQs, HRSA encourages you to work that out with Beacon and the manufacturer before going to HRSA. But there is a path for you to go directly to HRSA and inform them if there are payment delays in you getting that to that. Yeah, there was someone that asked should we be ordering yeah, pre-order. Yeah, I think the question is should you be pre-ordering? I'm not going to answer that. I think that there has been some questions around that from covered entities about pre-buying or pre-ordering. I'm not going to answer that. That's going to be very dependent on a case-by-case basis, but I appreciate some of you that provided some context on that. All right. Okay, so we're hitting the time here. So we are going to unfortunately we won't be able to get to all of your questions. But if you guys can why don't you send your questions to this sales at the PharmaForce and we'll collect them and reply. So if you send us a question, we'll make sure that you get a reply as quickly as we possibly can. With that being said, thank you so much. Can't thank you all enough for joining us. I know there's still so many of you still on here, and we're so grateful for that. I hope that you have a happy Thanksgiving, and we don't expect to do another webinar in December because of the Christmas season. So we don't expect to do another webinar. And if we don't do that, have a Merry Christmas. We're here to help. Reach out to us. Isn't that crazy? The year's over already. But
Yeah.
yeah, reach out, and we want to be as helpful as we can. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.